So just please take your seats. And we'll start slowly because we already lost 15 minutes. Okay, we are about to start the first set of oral sessions. And this session is somehow special because it's dedicated to a book. And I guess and why just in a second we'll tell you some more about the very idea of the book and how it's organized, etc. But generally, the session is on migration impacts on Poland as a country of origin, but presented in a very particular way. And they are three speakers, so three of us. Anne White, who is professor at the University College London, and also is the main editor and main author of the book. Iza Grabowska, you know already from my panel session, and myself. I will just do, in fact, two jobs at the same time. So we'll just try to chair the session, and I will also present something just in a second. And you know, the audience is small, so feel free to join the discussion afterwards. So we'll have three presentations on, let's say, three areas of that we try to cover in the book, and then discussion. So let's start with Anne, who will just tell you some more about the book and something else specific to her chapters.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. So I'm really very honoured to be here, and it's been wonderful doing the book together with Isa and Paweł and Krystyna Stanek and Kraków. Thank you. Being with three such very distinguished Polish migration scholars. The result of the work we've done over the last few years is this book. I left some flyers outside the hall. You're very much encouraged to download it. It is a free PDF, although obviously it is sort of nicer to read it as a book. It comes in paperback and hardback. The idea of the book came from my dissatisfaction with teaching students about the impact of migration on sending countries. And I had a very strong sense that the traditional ways of approaching the impact of migration were extremely narrow. So what I was worried about were quite a few different aspects of the way that migration was discussed with reference, usually to countries such as Morocco or other countries outside Europe. These tend to be narrow in different ways. It was partly because they started off by being connected to economics, and so they tended to deal with things like brain drain, but then also if they were about social change, it was often seen as being about social problems like children left behind or Euro orphans. Already I can see the hostility and I can hear the hostility in my own voice, the sort of stigmatizing terminology, but things being seen as problems, things being seen as only specific to particular places as well. So back to my picture here, this was a small town in southern Poland where the impact of migration is extremely visible in the housing. A lot of those houses were built by migrants, and they're very beautiful. Those people probably wouldn't have been able to build without migration money, but somehow people were sort of assuming that it was only in places like that that there was impact. Also, it's very policy-oriented, a lot of this research. It divides impact into good and bad, which we started talking about before, which means that we miss lots of things that could be described as neutral or perhaps disputed kinds of influence. They might seem good to one person and bad to somebody else. And as I mentioned before, this was partly because it was connected often to discourse about development and the idea that places you should be interested in were developing countries. So not really Europe. And then finally, there was a very strong focus on the impact of migration, looking at migration, but then that doesn't really take much into account people who just live in those countries, so the stayers. So this picture is probably familiar to a lot of you. You probably saw this little film, which was an advertisement on Polish television a couple of years ago. I'll return to it in a moment. But the research puzzle was how to study the migration impact more comprehensively and less normatively. So the solution is to, I think, is to look at it rather the other way round. So instead of looking at migration and its impact, look at society and then how society is being changed by migration. And since Poland has wonderful sociology and a lot of particularly quantitative evidence about social trends, it is really possible to map social change in this kind of way. But what's interesting is that a lot of Polish sociologists don't really take migration much into account. They're somehow hindered by a kind of methodological nationalism. This is a bit strange because, in fact, if you start to think about almost anything that happens in Poland, it can be connected to migration. So if we go back, this picture of Robert, you may remember the hero of the film. He's a grandfather, he lives in Warsaw or some big city. He's studying English in his spare time so he can go and visit his granddaughter who lives in London, whose mother is not Polish, and by implication she doesn't speak Polish. So this grandfather's life has been transformed and he has had to learn English as a retired person. He lives in a city, he's not in Limanova, but still his life has been totally changed. And you know, everybody in Poland watched this film, it was very meaningful to everybody. So it suggests that actually an awful lot of people are living in what sociologists would call transnational social space. And it makes no sense to look just at Polish society in Poland, but you have to think about Polish society spreading over international borders. And then that then gives you the clues to how to understand the impact. So if we look at it by my sort of inside-out method, looking at the change first and then at the migration influences, first of all, it provides a much more overarching kind of approach. It allows us to say, first of all, well, what are the important changes? What is happening in Poland? Is it becoming more democratic, more tolerant, more trusting, more equal in various ways? Well, those things that we'd most like to be able to answer with reference to how Polish society is changing. So it gives us our agenda, look at the big trends as much as possible, but it also can be very precise and very complex because it enables us to, having thought about those trends, to then think very carefully about how exactly migration might contribute. And it means that because we have very good evidence, which can be broken down, for example, by region or by social class or by gender, then we can begin to see those social trends in terms of where exactly change is happening and why it might be happening for some reasons, in some cases in Limanova, maybe for other reasons in Warsaw. So we immediately begin to understand Poland in a much more multifaceted kind of way. So the picture on the front of the book, this picture by Clay, it's this picture, it's called Highways and Byways, and it's meant to imply complexity, but at the same time, obviously there is a lot of strip farming in Poland, so it does sort of look a bit like maybe around Limanova, except it's actually Egypt. But if we were going to think about how this works out, for example, just taking the example of Robert. Well, if we think about one very important trend in Poland, as in Central and Eastern Europe, it's just that levels of education have been rising as measured in various ways. We all know about the rise in the number of university graduates. But it's also quite interesting that if we look at recent trends, we see a lot more people enrolled in adult education, and particularly retired people in adult education. So why is this happening? It can be partly about supply. So for various reasons, there are more opportunities. I won't discuss that here, but it's also about demand. Now, demand could be, for example, various practical reasons. And it could be that people living in Poland, for no reason connected to migration, want to inform themselves about something, and they go and take a class. But it could be that, like Robert, they're retired people who have a pressing migration-related reason to learn languages, for example. And you do find that, if you look specifically at language learning, this is going up among older people as well. But if you look at it in a more cultural kind of way, maybe people are taking more classes because there's more feeling that it's a good idea, and indeed it's even possible for retired people to have an interesting lifestyle, not just to go to church and look after the grandchildren, but there's that interest in active ageing for lots of reasons. But one part of that is that people go abroad to places like the United States, for example, and see lots of retired people who are really enjoying themselves in their retirement, and then they get inspired when they come back to Poland. So that would be what migration scholars would call as social remittance. So I'd like to do just a very short case study in the rest of this talk about one of the trends that I looked at. And this trend is trust. My chapters in the book are based on my various projects over the last 11 or 12 years about Polish migration. I'm not going to go through them all, but I want to mention a quite important turning point, which is when I stopped researching small towns and started researching cities like Wrocław and Warsaw, because I asked myself the question, how does Warsaw change as a result of migration? And people would look at me as if I was mad, and yet I knew that people like Robert were having their lives affected. I had very good friends in Poznan who were in exactly the same situation. So I knew that things were happening in cities, but it's much harder, particularly if you're a social anthropologist, to find out about cities. Still, this was an important part of my research. So, to go on then, about trust. So, trust. Political scientists and sociologists are quite interested in trust. And it does seem that if you look at graphs, polls are a bit more trusting today than they used to be. I'm talking about generalised trust, so believing that you can trust people you don't know, okay? And this, many people would argue, is very important for democracy and generally for the health of society. So if this is the trend, if only a quite small one, could be the case that it's about social remittances, so that somebody just researching the impact of migrants and looking at individual migrants would find evidence of this. And a lot of us who talk to migrants find that they tell us stories about Norwegians leaving their front doors or their cars open, or Dutch people who lend their Polish cleaners keys, or this sort of thing. And they are impressed by trust they see abroad. And sometimes they come back and say, wouldn't it be nice if Poland was like that? It's sort of being converted, but so this is a kind of social remittance effect. But we could look at it more widely. Why is Polish society in general becoming a bit more trusting? And look at what sociologists are telling us, not just migration scholars. So if we look at these sociological explanations, we will see that everywhere, I mean not just Poland, more trust is associated with more prosperity, higher levels of education. And we see it in Poland as well, like in cities, more highly educated people. Why is Denmark so trusting and happy and all the rest of it? So these are common phenomena. And if we see that Poland has been, as it has, becoming more prosperous and more highly educated, that's part of the explanation, presumably a very large part of the explanation for upward trends. Since people go abroad to study, since people earn money abroad, migration could also be connected here as a kind of secondary influence, though we probably want to see most of the main reasons for the prosperity and the education as being connected directly to Poland, but migration might be having some sort of role. So we can find evidence of this by doing qualitative research. But, you know, at the same time, well, there is a problem because clearly levels of education have gone up a lot, higher education, and levels of prosperity overall have gone up a lot. So why isn't trust higher? That's the thing that really needs to be researched, I think. It's going up, but at the same time, not as much as you probably would, well, you'd expect. So there might be something that was, oh, sorry, I don't know. Sorry, how did I do it? Okay, so you might get in a situation where, in fact, there are some parts of Poland, or there are some migration-related reasons which are depressing trust. And for all of these social trends, it's not just that there's one reason for them going in a particular direction, but there might be some things that were making that trend go in that direction, but other things that were pulling it back, so it wasn't, you know, like trust isn't increasing as much as you might expect. And a lot of research done by Michał or by myself or lots of people shows that there is a link between migration and mistrust, that Poles very often refer to the fact that you can't trust other Polish people abroad, and there is a whole sort of culture about this, lots of myths that circulate. Michał talks about the myth of the Polish con man. You know, there are lots of things, and you can go to small towns and do research. Lots of people will tell you, you know, people have been cheated by agents who promised to fix them up with work abroad. Other Poles always trying to do people down. This is saying that Pole will drown you for €1, and all these sorts of things. There's a lot of very mistrusting kind of stuff going on there, which could be encouraging and does, I'm convinced, encourage Poles in small towns to think that Poles shouldn't be trusted. If you don't know someone, you shouldn't trust them. So we have kind of contradictory trend. But remember what I was saying about how we shouldn't overgeneralize. We should look and think about like how the trends are moving in different parts of Polish society. Well, it seems to me that it's really dangerous, and particularly for political reasons, and even particularly dangerous this week in Poland, to say there are cities and small towns. Okay, we must not do this. Let us not persuade ourselves that Poland is so polarised, because there are people in small towns who do not vote for law and justice. There are people who, in various ways, are actually changing their opinions as a result of migration. And when you do lots of interviews in small towns, as I have done, you do find evidence of this. And it is the case that some people in small towns come back from abroad really wanting, for example, for there to be more, at least evidence of trust in strangers in Poland, more readiness to smile to strangers, to be pleasant to strangers, to at least try and create that atmosphere of trust which they have seen abroad. So this might mean that if things are changing in Poland, it's not only because cities are changing a lot, but some people in small towns are also changing their views, and often this is because of migration. So some final comments on trust. Final comments would be, very predictably, that it's a rather ambiguous trend, like a lot of trends. Okay, they go up and they go down, or they go up only a little bit. A very good example would be openness to difference and racism that was mentioned before. It's hard to read these trends, and obviously survey evidence is always imperfect. But if we want to look at trends which are a bit ambiguous, often it's best to think in terms of competing forces, which are sort of helping to explain why that trend is as it was. So with migration, I would argue there are quite a few migration-related reasons why trust might be both increasing and decreasing. But I just want to finish, well, penultimate slide, sort of going back to our book, okay, sort of wider arguments, particularly for my own chapters. So if we look overall, how is Poland changing? It's a really difficult question to answer that in one sentence. But I would be brave enough to say that putting all the survey evidence together, particularly surveys up to about like 2015-16, they do show the Poles were becoming more open to difference, and also surveys go on showing that in many ways Poland is becoming more equal. And personally, I don't believe that Poland suddenly became full of xenophobes in 2015, and I think we have to keep reassuring ourselves that the social trends that we saw happening up to then are still happening, just that we see things like hate crime and horrible internet sites and things. So this would be my argument about the overall trend, although I'm not trying to be over-optimistic or anything, or deterministic. Well, how is migration feeding into this? I would argue it's a leveller and an eye-opener. In respect not just to migrants, but also stayers, people like Robert who go and visit people abroad, or people who are always on the phone to their relatives abroad, or just exposed to life abroad in numerous ways. But for people like Robert, perhaps it's not such a huge thing, because he could have learned English by going to a class in his big city, and he seems to be a very well-educated guy anyway, judging by his flat. Okay, but for somebody living in a small town who wouldn't have access to adult education classes so readily, and for somebody who might not be so well-educated, the chances for them to be exposed to new ideas are somehow fewer, quite often. So if we're looking at where migration makes the most change, I'd argue it's often in those parts of society, which some people might see as unchanging, but I think that would be actually quite patronising and wrong. And so the value added of migration is much stronger for those people. We see it very clearly in the housing, in places like Międzynarodowa, or in remittances, with those economic things. But if we're looking at the social remittances, the cultural factors, I think it's also true for them. And finally, and I've run out of time, I know, and I'm on my last slide, this is how you access our book. Okay, so you just click and you get the PDF. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I guess right now it's my turn. So I'm afraid we are slowly running out of time, so please be so kind and tell me when 20 minutes will be over. Otherwise, we'll start and take some others. Let me maybe start with one comment. I remember the time when we started to discuss the very idea of the book, and when Hans presented the inside-out approach, and my thoughts at the time were quite simple, because I thought that, come on, this is what we are exactly doing. I mean, we as CMR, because in fact the CMR started in the mid-1990s with just looking at social change in Poland, and just what we are trying, we're just trying to locate migration in this broad sphere of social change. And the second point, this is what we as economists we are doing, because we are always trying to create or build sort of counterfactual, and just to find out what are the real outcomes of migration. So frankly speaking, my approach presented in the book, it was nothing new from my other papers or other research, so sorry for that. But I guess it's somehow coherent also with the rest of the book. So for today, what I wanted to speak about was just about expected and unexpected effects. Just maybe to emphasize how different, in fact, the migration experience is from experience of other less developed countries. And I will just start with the context as such. So I will start with the macroeconomic situation of Poland, then we'll tell you something about the process as such, and luckily enough, we already heard a lot about it, so I just made it very, very short. And then I will just discuss both expected and unexpected effects, or as you will see, rather no effects, because this is probably the case if we speak about Poland. So again, I will not torture you with the economic data here, but just let me say a few words. In fact, we just look at the situation of Poland, and particularly if you look at the post-2004 period, the picture is quite clear, and this is a real story of economic success. And particularly, if you just consider the economic crisis of 2008, 2010, it's even better visible. And what you see here that just quarterly, year-to-year changes in GDP per capita, and just quarterly changes in GDP per capita. And the pictures here, they are mostly here to show you how volatile the process was before, and how smoother it becomes since EU enlargement. So apparently, in economic terms, the situation in Poland is far more stable since 2004 than it was before. That's the first point. And the second, and it's also very important and worth noting, if you just take a look here, for example, what we experienced, they were just several very short episodes of negative changes in GDP per capita when you just look quarter by quarter. And this is really exceptional in the European context, considering particularly the global economic crisis. And I could just present you a large number of other figures, I don't know, including export share in the GDP, investment share in GDP, whatsoever. All of those measures, they show about the same real success story. And right now, if you just look at the labor market, apparently what we observe, there is more or less stable trend in the number of active population, apart from the very last period, when we already experienced a slow demographic decline. However, what is important, I will just go back to this in a second, is a steady increasing number of employed persons since 2003, 2004. What we also observe in Poland is a gradual change in the structure of employment, starting from share of agriculture of around 30% to 10% right now, with stable share of industry and growing, significantly growing share of industry. So if you just consider all of those pictures, this is a real story of success. And this is perfectly well visible when we just look at the labor market, and this is a perfect graph for a conference like that, because you have no idea what's going on here. I will just try to explain also later. In fact, this data shows various aspects of the labor market, and probably the most important for most of us would be unemployment rate. If you just take a look at that, what we observe is just a huge decline between 2004 and 2008, and then a more or less stable situation to very low levels. You will see it soon. But apart from that, there was a lot of going on here on the slide. I will just go back to this later. A lot is going on in terms of jobs creation, so the level of employment. There's a lot going on with regard to wage level, of course, and also something completely new, and I will just stop you for a second. This red line, it says something about just efficiency of the labor market. It's called sometimes practice index. It's just simply a number of job offers per one employed person. If you just take a look at that, it was at really, really low level till, let's say, 2010, 2012, but since then it's growing rapidly. And in fact, it reflects the changing situation of Poland as being net emigration or net immigration countries. This is what we focus a lot when talking about labor market. This is unemployment rate, and for those of you who are not working on the Polish labor market on constant basis, it can be a real surprise. These are the unemployment rate levels for 2017. And in fact, those levels are much higher these days than the EU average. And they are really small in, in many areas of the country. They are below 5%, which is quite differences with regard between, let's say, this part of the country, southern and eastern part of the country. And why so interesting? Why so also important in the context of my speech? Because if you just consider the data for the pre-2004 period, the map looked completely different, with those regions here suffering a huge unemployment. For example, the graph here just showed the percentage change in unemployment between 2004 and 2007. If you just take a look at here, these are the western, they are the regions of western Poland, and those regions, they experience a huge change in unemployment rate. I'm not saying now that was because of migration or just, I don't know, something else, so we'll just go back to this, but this is a huge shift that just changed, that is happened on the Polish labor market. So again, this is what we discussed mostly. I will not tell you a lot about the process, just a few facts. So even today, according to the Polish data, we have about 2.5 million staying temporarily abroad. We use this fuzzy category, Polish permanent citizens who are staying temporarily abroad. We know that this temporariness could mean even term on 15 years, but this is still what we use it. So it is around 6 to 7% of population, so quite massive. And this is what John pointed to already. There's a shift absolutely observed in the terms of destination countries, from Germany being absolute leader to UK as the, let's say, the winner of the post-enlargement migration. And this is what we discussed also during the panel. From my point of view, what we observe is generally lower selectivity level. And this is because of many reasons, including also a smaller role of barriers and just lower barriers to mobility. And I would just name two important selectivity factors. This is education, I will just go back to this later, and place of residence. So these are still the most important factors. However, and I just also tried to emphasize it before, in my opinion, there is nothing like one single model of Polish migration, nothing like that. And also, I guess it's also clearly visible in the book, and we are just trying to emphasize it. And secondly, we should really talk a lot about the changing phases of Polish migration, from this incomplete migration story to more opportunity-driven migration. And also, we should maybe discuss and also contest the fluid or liquid migration concept. And this is quite important, because in the few first years of post-enlargement migration, we discussed a lot the temporariness of migration. So it was very clear that this is the very nature of Polish post-enlargement migration. However, the situation is changing, I guess. Okay, I'll just maybe just one comment. Also somehow related to previous discussion, because if you would like to disentangle drivers of Polish migration, I think it still makes sense to look at aspirations and capabilities of people. And it's quite important that we tend to focus a lot on capabilities with the institutional changes in the first place. However, in my opinion, and it was so visible during the panel, we should pay more attention to the aspirational part. And particularly, education plays a very important role here, but it goes far beyond education. So aspirations is what we should definitely consider. And now, the piece on strategies. What you see right now, this is data from the study commissioned by National Bank of Poland. We already had several waves of the study. And if you just take a look at this, this is, for example, the average length of stay abroad. And if you just go country by country, these are the 4 most important destination countries for Polish migrants. Apparently, it seems that there is a tendency to prolong the stay abroad. And at some point, together with Ania and Itzka, we try to calculate something we call a permanency index or indicator, showing let's say, tendency to settle, or at least prolong, to stay longer at destination. And again, the picture here is really clear. It's not only about the UK or Ireland, it's also about Germany, and interestingly enough, it's to a large extent also about the Netherlands. And the Netherlands is a striking case, because most of migrants choosing the country, they were just purely seasonal migrants. And even in this case, if you just take a look, there is a clear trend towards permanency. I know this is very important also for our discussion, because particularly when we consider economic effects of migration, you can say that it really depends on the question if migrants are temporary or if they can return or not. These days, we are in sort of troubles because we don't know. And to make the story even more complicated, I would like to present you the cluster analysis we performed for 2008 and 2012 on over 20,000 observations. And according to this cluster analysis, what we found, we just were able to identify 5 types of migration. So circular migrants, this is quite clear. Then overstayers, so people who just usually prolong the stay abroad, settles. So people with clear tendency to settle, and also old wave that is very specific for Germany, so people who arrived, for example, in 1990s and they are still abroad. And interestingly enough, some of you might be familiar with the concept somehow presented in migration literature, and it was the concept of Project Me. So very individualistically oriented migration, related just to self-development whatsoever. And however, in our study, what we found was something else. We rather found project family. So people very strongly oriented towards their families, and also with a tendency to prolong their stay and to stay abroad even permanently. And just right now, if you just take a look at those countries, in every single case, you have just the green bar showing 2009, 2012. This is the more recent situation. And again, you just take a look. Netherlands, this is the huge decline in the share of circular migrants and increasing number of settlers. In case of Ireland, also clearly visible. And just remember, this is the post-crisis period in case of Ireland. Quite tough in economic terms. And even here, there is a growing number of overstayers and settlers. UK, it's about the same picture. And this is important also to know when we are discussing social change and destination, and also economic impacts of migration. Because apparently it seems that around 10 years since enlargement, it was clear already that large majority of Polish migrants, they will not return in the short term, at least. So they were really prolonging the stays abroad, and they started to settle, quite important. And now, labor market. I guess I still have 5 minutes? 7, okay. This is the graph you show already to some extent, and this is the major figure we are focusing on. So this is the unemployment rate here, the left line. And now you just put on the same graph the stock of temporary migrants. So we know that the migration data is quite often inaccurate, but this is the best what we have. So this is the estimate of Central Statistical Office of Poland. And apparently, if you just put the data in such a way on a slide, you would just say that there is a clear negative correlation between these two. Yeah? So we have a rise in migration and unemployment is declining. So then we could just say that because of migration, unemployment rate in Poland is on decline. However, I will just maybe destroy the picture in such a nice way. This is what I'm doing. You know, the picture is really far more complex. Because apparently we observe increase in migration, we observe decline in unemployment, but at the same time, what we have, for example, we have several phases of quite massive employment growth. And this is really interesting and important. And if we are looking for one variable that could just explain a lot of those changes here, is this one. This is annual GDP growth. In fact, it seems that GDP growth in Poland is the main factor that is somehow driving the changes on the Polish labor market. I will just go back to this in a second. So not a simple picture as it could see. So if we just take such a shorter perspective, and in short term, what we do usually in economics, we are considering level of unemployment and level of wages. So apparently, what we can do, we can just try to apply this counterfactual scenario. This is what I started with. And if so, we could say that the labor force in Poland, because of out-migration, was around, let's say, 800,000 smaller than in the counterfactual case. So apparently the migration pressure was much smaller than in the 2004 period. However, then if you just look at the analysis, the outcome is quite puzzling. Because in fact there was no clear impact of unemployment, there was no clear impact on vacancies, there was only very selective and relatively small impact on the wage level, for example, limited to selected professions only. So in fact, if you just run basic analysis, it seems that it's quite difficult to show the linkage. And I can tell you why is it so, because it's very challenges in economic terms. And it's challenges because we face a number of additional effects. And those effects, for example, would include educational system that just work as an absorptive measure here. Then we have self-employment also working as an unemployment level limiting measure. Then we have accession effect in terms of money flow to Poland, so EU money. Then we have just generally low level of internal mobility, and then could just act as a factor suppressing or just the opposite unemployment, and a number of structural mismatches. And this is why in economics we quite often refer to general equilibrium models. So we're just trying to control all of the variables in the same time. And as for me as economist, this is possibly the best way we can just, what we can do about impacts of migration. So I will not go into many of approaches. I will focus on the most recent approach we have. And this is the study done by National Institute of Economic and Social Research in 2011. And this is the data. Just take a look at this. This is the outcome of post-2004 migration on countries of the region and impact on GDP and GDP per capita, unemployment rate, and real wages. And this is, again, this is striking. You can't see the unemployment rate here because the impact was so small. It was, in fact, negligible according to the data. So it seems that even if we observe decline in unemployment, it was driven by other factors, not directly related to migration. And importantly, what I'm talking about right now, this is the aggregate level. I'm not saying that migration has no large impact on local and regional level. This absolutely could be the case. Right now, we are talking about the aggregate level. So what we observed in the case of Poland, it was just a small, really small wage pressure. And just to give you a clue, you just compare the situation in Poland with the situation in Bulgaria and Romania. Because in their cases, the negative impacts of migration, it seems they were far larger than in the case of Poland. So the question is, why it was so limited? We can discuss it later, and my answer will be very, very simple. That this is because of selectivity of migration, particularly a large wave of well-educated people, for example, who were leaving Poland directly after completion of their education. And secondly, strong oversupply of labor. And maybe I'll just come back to this in the last slide of my presentation. I don't know, okay, 2 or 3 minutes. So let me maybe skip this one. This is the story of brain drain, and if we really experience brain drain in Poland, my answer would be no. Okay. So I'm making for sure. And this is my very last slide, because maybe to explain why I constructed the presentation that way. What I was trying to show you here, these were the expected effects of migration. When we study migration impacts, we usually look at unemployment rate, we look at the wage level. So these were the expected effects. Interestingly enough, in the case of Poland, it seems that they are other non-effects. So nothing significant happened because of migration with regard to this. However, and this is what we tried to do together with Mark and also with Isa at some point, we just try to ask a question, what could be the long-term and structural impacts of migration? And in order to do this, we applied the concept proposed years ago by Laird and others. And the idea here is very simple. I just try to say it in just maybe 60 seconds. So the story is that in the case of Poland, what we experienced was a very particular model of development, sometimes called socialist model of development, with under-organization and a focus on a development of heavy industry. And because of this, and also because of demographic developments, in fact, what we observed in Poland in the 1990s, there were huge structural mismatches on the labor market. And to say it in very simple words, the story was that people were simply living and staying not in the most optimal locations in labor market terms. And because of that, what we observed was a huge migratory potential. By the way, migratory potential estimated by those guys here at around 25% of the total population, around 10 million. This is how they estimated migration potential of Poland in early 1990s. The story is, however, that this potential never transformed into real migration before 2004. Why? Because in fact, migration was strongly dependent on financial capital and social capital in the form of migrant networks. And there's also strongly prohibited barriers at destination. So in fact, and this is why we started to discuss the thesis, the story is that since 2004 only, we can speak about not only massive migration, but also egalitarian migration. I mean, available, accessible for everyone. So now the hypothesis is that because of this migration, if we can get rid of, let's call it redundant population, I mean redundant in labor market terms, it could maybe propose us, give us at the end more efficient allocation of labor. So that was a huge opportunity we started to discuss a few years back. However, this is not an ultimate solution. because what is needed, they are labor market reforms. So in fact, and this is the case discussed by Layab and other in the early 1990s. For example, this was the case of Southern European countries. They experienced massive outflow of people, but at the same time they managed to imply at least some labor market reforms and also to change their labor market. So the question, this is my very last question in this presentation, if today, in 2018, we can say that this really happened in Poland, and my answer again would be, unfortunately, not. So I would rather tend to speak about Polish migration as a missed opportunity. And missed opportunity in terms of structural changes on the Polish labor market. It was very quick, so I can explain it later in the discussion. Thanks. And now we have 20 minutes for Ilza, and still we'll probably have some, at least short discussion.
I know this is a very difficult time now after lunch with filled stomachs, so I try to wake you up a little bit with my arguments. Pavel used mostly official statistics, public statistics, official indicators. I would like to show you another flip of the coin, and I will focus on social remittances, which we also treated as one of the key lenses of our book. So it's a great privilege to speak after Anne White, who was the spiritus movement of this book. Without her, the book wouldn't be today with us. And after Pavel, who showed that wonderful synthesis of what's happening with the Polish labor market and what is the role of migration into it. So just to bring you up with the context we are in now, of course, I mentioned in the bottom the 100 years after the publication of Polish Prism, but also in 2019 we will have 30 years after the breakdown of the communism and 15 years of free movement of Poles and membership of the EU. And if we treat this conference as a prelude to these events, we can have important perspective to consider the impact of migration on Poland, EU mobility, and social change. And aims of my talk, as I promised, is to think together out of the box. It's to explain non-financial aspects of migration called social remittances. I will come back to it. What we really mean under this term, to show unseen in migration process, and to look at the other flip of the migration coin next to what we see in public statistics by calculating indicators. So in 30 years of social, political, economic and cultural changes in Poland would happen anyway, without migration, of course. We have realized that. But migration, if we assume that, and Mike mentioned that, migration reinforces social change. So let's treat international migration of Poles as a kind of accelerator of change in many societal domains. And I will try to show you that with the help of the lenses of social remittances. But what social remittances really are, if we take into consideration return mobility, so I also refer to this concept instead of using the concept of return migration. So we're not going to think about money, we already mentioned economic remittances, but of course the concept was coined by Peggy Levitt to grasp everything next to non-financial remittances, next to non-financial transfers. So in many families, when a person came back from a journey, was asked, what have you brought to me, to us? Yes, and that was a family member sat down and from the suitcase was taking out various gifts, books, pamphlets, whatever. Yes, so let's think like that we have this suitcase and we take out practices, ideas, know-hows, and social skills. This is very roughly the concept of social remittances. But what we did in this book, based on previous book with Michał Garabik, Migrants as Agents of Change, we had a wonderful project on social remittances between Poland and UK, which wanted to unwrap everything what we know about the continent, to bring in also things we discovered while researching the transnational social space between Poland and UK. So Peggy Levitt treated social remittances and norms, values, practices, social capital. We had also a study from Romania by Dumitru Sandu, who said that there are attitudes and resources. And we made it simpler with Michał, Ewa Jaświńska and Agnieszka Radziwinowicz, just to operationalize it more into ideas and practices. And then we noticed that many things also happened with the workplaces, so I deepened it with the concept of social skills. So what we did in this project, we really reconstructed the process of social remitting, not only social remittances themselves, but also process of social remitting with human agency at the forefront. So it's about encountering, acquiring, transmitting, transferring, implementing, applying, spilling over, diffusing. And social remitting happens by both imitation, copy and paste behaviors, which are of course sometimes very problematic, but also by innovations to adjust to local conditions, which in our cases were really demanding, but also showing some outcomes of these remittances. And Michał particularly focused on the very interesting phenomenon of this process, social resistance. That is, it's not only that people acquire an easy transfer, either by imitation or innovation, but also there is social resistance at every stage of this process. But I'm not going to go into it because this is the topic for separate papers. We also identified domains of social remittances. Workplaces are very strong domains because migrant workers spend a lot of time at work, yes, so naturally workplaces appear as these spaces for social remitting, both acquiring, encountering, but also transmitting, where work-related skills can be acquired. Local community institutions, health centers, schools, sports centers, neighborhoods, but also family and peers. In our book, we relate to all these domains. I would like today to relate mostly to social skills. And there are everyday spaces of social remittances, micro-publics, like workplaces, schools, colleges, youth centers, sport clubs, and other spaces of association, and more micro-privates relating to family, peers, and other friends. So this is mostly the coverage of all micro spaces of society, yes? So this is a very peculiar process happening in a society which we can call social remitting. And what we discovered with this project, that local perspective is crucial to show this unseen, yes? That public statistics are not perceptible enough to uncover all these processes which are going on. That's why local perspective is needed. And we went to small towns of Poland with their transnational links in the UK. So parallelly we research both local communities in Poland and their transnational links in the UK. So we selected people across various types of migrants, but also stayers, members of families, who we called agents of change. There are very casual people who act somehow in their local communities. And there's a nurse, a cosmetician, a bartender, a soft drug dealer who unexpectedly was introducing health and safety procedures in his little companies when they were allowed in Poland. A pet shop owner, a teacher, bricklayer, company owner, a sport couch owner, a sport club, local art. They are all microtypes, yes? So it's for people who act and then transfer social remittances. And there are things from work practice, work ethics, health and safety practices, care, social skills, organization of charity actions, negotiation of gender roles, organization of family life, eating habits, experimenting with food, to self-consciousness, kind of feeling of independence, and newest racism. So all things were already mentioned, but we covered it and identified in our project. But in order to be agent of change, you need to have a set of features, combined set of features, which includes personality traits, opportunities for contact and informal learning abroad, organizational and institutional settings for diffusion in hometown, socially useful everyday role in the community, not to be superior to others, but rather to be one of them, migration money and awareness of its value, so it's not totally disconnected from money, a network of active contacts in hometown. So not everyone can act as agents of change, because there are some features to be combined in order to act in local community. What we learned, what I said, social skills are these features which are important, and the second part of my talk I would like to relate to that. And in my other studies, I noticed that despite the fact that migrant workers were below their formal qualification, they built up their aspirations, but they learned something next to that. And they learned by observing, communicating, and doing things with others. So migration in many instances can act as a kind of aha moment, yes, that you are surprised by something, that you experience a disjuncture of cultural and social context, that you're suddenly out of your comfort zone, out of your well-known context, and then it forces you to compare your previous situation with your current situation, things you experience around. So in the qualitative part of my research, I identified three capabilities. Capability for cross-cultural communication, and it doesn't mean that you only acquire language, because that's the thing, but the kind of understanding of other cultures. Capability for dealing with emotional labor, that you need to deal with people in various situations, because many people work in hospitality sector and care sector, they need to deal with people. I'm not going to go into this situation in depth, you can find it in the article, but just to mention that. And capability for taking initiative and acting independently. Why Polish people were strict, though they were doing 150 or 200% of the norm of a day? Because they were taking initiative, they were much more effective. Because they were highly qualified, they couldn't use their formal qualifications, but they could use this kind of agency to take initiative and to act independently, even in low-skilled jobs. So migrants are able to acquire these capabilities in their workplaces abroad were relational, so they were able to interact with other people. Of course, non-relational workplaces like freezing companies do not allow for that you can communicate, or you are dressed up in a uniform, so there are no contacts between people. So there is, of course, a precondition to acquire, and if they felt not discriminated comparing to other ethnicities. But again, there was a lesson for them, even though they felt discriminated. And I enter also not a migration study, but the biggest study of human capital in Poland by Polish Agency for Enterprise Development. The study, we combined the data 2010 and 2014, and we discovered that migration doesn't impact on people's social skills evenly. There are differences between age cohorts or generations, as you might think. So we made various linear regressions across birth years, 1946, 1993. So you see there was nearly more than 50 years, nearly 50 years of various birth years for social skills selected by factor analysis among 11 categories of skills. So we selected social skills by cognitive skills, interpersonal and intrapersonal, and we found out the impact. Combined with other characteristics like coming from big cities, being employed, and being well educated. Of course, it's very intuitive, and our linear regressions confirm it. But what was really peculiar is the strongest impact migration has on skills of the generation of change and risk. The generation who had 18 years in 1989 and were in early 30s when Poland joined the EU. So that was not the youngest generation. The youngest joined later because in 2004 they were just graduating from high schools. So they couldn't start their migration then. They started their migration a few years later. And again, if we go into the generation thing, it has lower, but still it has an impact on the generation of migration and opportunities born between 1983 and 1988. And what is particular, the migration impact ceases on those who were born after 1989. Yes. So in the youngest age cohort, migration qualitatively impacts on social skills connected with life, transition to adulthood, relating and communicating with people, understanding society. So I'm not going to go into it, but just to show you what's the qualitative part on those also born after 1989, that social skills in that quantitative part are more related to workplaces, work-life employability, while the youngest cohorts more on life skills, yes, life orientation, self-development, self-confidence, bifocal perspective is very important in this respect. So to sum up, post-accession migrants are overqualified but not overskilled. We cannot say that someone is socially overskilled. There is a room for receiving, acquiring, absorbing, enhancing, and transferring social skills. It is worth considering generational impact of migration on social skills, especially of the generation of change and risk and generation of migration of opportunities. So social skills are not only important for labor market, employability, workplaces, but also in the course of life, in making our way through the world. And just to sum up the panel, migration is not an isolated process and cannot be distilled from wider social trends. It goes hand in hand with other social trends. It reinforces and contributes to wider societal, but more we see micro than macro trends. It's very important to make this disclaimer. So migration reinforces, counteracts, sometimes even seizes. This is not only about contributing, but also seizing some practices. The impact of migration on human capital relates not only to formal qualification, but mostly social skills and competences. So migrants can act as agents of change, but an opportunity structure is needed. So social remittances will travel farther if society is already developing in the same direction. So our story is not finished in this sense, and as the change is ongoing. Thank you.
Our session is almost finished. I guess we may have 5 minutes for discussion. So if there are some questions, please ask them now. If not, we can also have the discussion during the coffee break.
Okay, I have a question to Isabella about the results of the study, which is really very interesting, but I have seen in most of these aspects of social remittances very positive things, and maybe could you also discuss if you have found some evidence for the negative effects, because we know even from this first study in Miraflores that there are also some negative aspects.
Okay, more questions?
Thank you, John Salt from UCO. I'm wondering if Polish employers actually adapted themselves to the sort of temporary and seasonal types of movement that UK employers have adapted to in providing work for Poles who came to the UK. So it was a loose system that was developed over there. Were Polish employers looking to employ those who were returning, also adapting to a rather looser approach which involved more short-term movement, more short-term employment, and more likely to be able to include circulation in the way that they often work?
So, Isa, are you going to reply? First one.
Thank you for this question, and I think I passed the mic to Michał because I was speaking a lot. Say something about the negative cases in ours.
Thank you very much, Isa. I'm sorry, I couldn't be very surprised. I was thinking about another question actually, but
Too late.
I mean, thank you very much for allowing. But I think one of the aspects we always have difficulties in tackling is to catch up with our analysis, with our understanding of issues that happen, catch up with things on the ground, with things happening on the ground. Sometimes they happen so fast, and developments are going in such a direction that we are caught by surprise. And I think last couple of years, at least last year, caught me slightly by surprise, but I don't know if scholars by surprise in Britain definitely, is the kind of more active the rise in Polish organizations which you can identify as on the far right of the political spectrum, which is a difficult case, and notwithstanding the circumstances of post-Brexit uncertainty, and John Fox from University of Bristol calls it integration through racism and all that stuff. But I think there's that's definitely a case of social remittances going on from Poland, from political situation in Poland, back to UK. So that will be a case of that happening the other way around. But from the study, when we carried out the study, we kind of frequently raise that subject, that apart from a definitely present, and I guess a dominant feature of what Anne calls a society getting more open, more kind of at least less prone to closure in the nationalist racial stereotyping. And there is an undercurrent definitely of an experience of diversity in countries like Britain seen negatively and then brought back to Poland. So I think Agnieszka would also have had this a few instances where she referred to sort of experience, her interviewees' experiences seen in Britain and regarded by them as in a way, well, we don't really want Poland to become like that. Now, obviously, whether it's negative or positive, it's that to our political views, but also our understanding of how Polish society changes and will change in the future. So, but I'm sure there are many other negatives. I didn't think being cause something like that. But thank you, Lisa.
Okay, I will do the same trick in a second to do Lord. Regarding your point, so what I would say first, that interestingly enough, and this is my reading of the situation, return migration was not necessarily associated with positive benefits in terms of labor market returns. That would be my reading. However, your question was far more specific, so that's why, if you allow, I probably would ask Janek Brzozowski, because he was involved in several studies looking exactly at the situation of returnees and also in those contexts you mentioned. However, before, okay, so there will be another response. However, you know, going also back to the points you raised in the presentation, because this is really interesting story about the Polish employers and migration from and, by the way, into Poland. Because, for example, if you just ask the very question about drainage from Poland, interestingly enough, it seems that those people who are living, they were not impacting on labor shortages on the Polish market. In fact, so the shortages, they started to appear in those sectors where, let's say, Polish people who live in Polish university, they were not that interested to take jobs there. So that would be my reading. However, what started to happen in the post 2004 years, it was a clear substitution of labor with capital in many Polish companies. And now, what is super interesting is what's happening now because of large wave of Ukrainian migrants. And it's exactly as you said in the case of Britain. And it's clearly visible, for example, in the agricultural sector. Simply, Polish farmers just stopped investing in mechanization because they can rely on cheap labor. So I fully agree that, you know, employer strategies are as important as migrant strategies. But Janek, probably you will have something more specific to add about returnees and how they are being integrated into Polish communities.
Okay. So, in terms of the reaction of employers, yes, that I could. So, I already mentioned when I was discussing in a panel that returnees on average fare really well upon return in terms of labor market integration. But in a couple of these projects I was involved with, we had also focus group interviews with employers, actually, precisely with not only public placement offices, but also private entrepreneurs. And many of the aspects that they were actually stressing in terms of unexploited potential. So first of all, over expectations of the returnees. So they claimed, for instance, that their proficiency of English language is fantastic, while actually working in Tesco together with two Pakistani friends not necessarily resembles in a fantastic commandment in English, which you might use in a business-to-business sector, for instance, working in Shell outsourcing department. Yes, the other issue, very important, was that many of the returnees actually invested a lot in human capital, but they did not consider those investments important. So, for instance, they did not bother to bring back the certificates from former employers in the UK. So, for instance, they were claiming that they know something, but they had no documents to prove it. And it was really a tricky issue. So stemming from these discussions, there were even some recommendations, and then there are some booklets prepared for future returnees. Think in advance, because every single document you have from your previous job really matters in getting a better job in Poland. And employers were really sorry about this, because they knew that, for instance, the potential candidate is very interesting, but there were some binary choices in terms of the qualifications, and if they couldn't meet it, they couldn't be offered a job.
And I personally, I'm not aware of any measures dedicated to, let's say, circular migrants. This was your say. But Anne, you want to go to
yes, maybe it's not quite the same, but in the period immediately, after 2004, what struck me in my research, and I think Isa also found it in her research and wrote about it in Movers and Stairs, is just how many employers were prepared to give their employees unpaid leave. So you could explain the presence of people, on this circular basis in the UK, partly because employers were being understanding, particularly in places where there was a lot of migration, and they understood the predicament of the people who needed to migrate for the short term.
Thank you. So, would you like to have final word? Huh?
Me? No, thank you. No,
so the final word is coffee break. Many thanks.
A czyli po polsku może. No właśnie, bo ci Włosi właśnie czymś tam po angielsku.
No może jak to słucham. No zobaczymy, może
Jak się pojawią,
przyjechali później, ale to naprawdę, to jesteśmy tutaj, że to 10 minut to jest naprawdę.
Pamiętam konferencję, na którą też mnie kiedyś żeście wysłali w Bratysławie, którą współorganizowaliście i byli tam Austriacy, którzy przyjechali na swój referat w połowie sesji i wyszli, zaprezentowali i wyszli. Tak.
Także zobaczymy po przerwie, jaki będzie finał.
A już a propos tego, już jest.
To najnowszy premier.
Tak, no właśnie kiedyś nie była taka sekcja.
Mogę sobie wypróbować prezentację?
Tak. Dobra. Tak, to będzie sesja migracji. A to
Dobrze, że nie widziałaś twarzy. To jest super. Jak ktoś nie słucha, nie, to jest w ogóle takie super niebezpieczne. W ogóle, że ktoś muszę w ogóle włączyć. Ja wiedziałem, że ja to słucham, bo tak tam w ogóle zapytał. A co? Nie masz takiego pomaganego? Ja? Ale w zasadzie my sobie tutaj siedzimy i tam sobie coś tam robimy, a w czasie nie wiem, dlaczego szybko, czy nazywają za projektu, po prostu i samochód. Oni sobie tak pisali. Co? Dzisiaj teraz. Rozbijasz samochodem. Znaczy, nie ona, tylko rządową limuzyną, przecież ona nie jeździ sama. Nic jej się nie stało. Jakiś koleś jechał